Hello there, this is Ben Fournier of Benevolent Saticorum, and I'm going to read my article on a blog called Medium, uh, Personality and Typology. I had considered the title Socionics and Characterization as well, but either way. And the idea is, for now we see in a mirror darkly kind of thing. It's an imperfect image, but the truth behind it is what's reflected regardless. For as a person thinks in their heart, so they are. Proverbs 23:7a. What is typology? What is it? I'm sure many have heard of MBTI and the history of it, developed by Briggs and Myers from the work of Jung, etc., and likely also of Vox and Adam ruins everything, doing the whole everything you know is wrong spiel about it, and so much of that sort of blindly dismissive hand-waving. In response, because I disagree and don't care for that type of thing, whereby they teach inaccurately just to later say, look what we claim to be true now. Flavor of sensationalism. I recommend watching Fire of Learning's videos, Scientific Defense of MBTI, on YouTube regarding that hype. That's imperfect too, and they have a few memes that apparently were made by trolls, but for the most part it's still pretty good. Either way, let's pretend it's a pseudoscience. It can still be useful. Psychology itself is often called a soft science anyway, and when dealing with the most advanced supercomputer ever, the brain, and working with it as more or less a black box, of course there is uncertainty due to mere entropy, or complexity. The larger a system like weather, is going to be, even with your best data gatherings, it's still going to be chaotic. Every forecast is a coin flip. However, even if it's uncertain in some detail, it still frankly nevertheless may be useful. Normally useful for understanding others, how they think and value things, depth psychology, Jungian analytical psychology, socionics, all the different names for the same basic thing, can be useful in the creation of characters, how to express the cognitive functions in point of view, and how they may appear to others in various stress modes, and increasing with the tension of the story basically, though not always, as stress depends on individual stimuli to a given character, though as the story progresses to climax there ought to be increasing stress for everyone generally. I mean, it depends how you write your story too. It would be cool if more versions than just the hero's journey were made, but everyone's programmed to go with the hero's journey, even if they don't realize it, so oh well. Although supposedly some experts prefer Big Five for whatever reason, calling it more scientific because they use different statistical methods and fiddle around with graphs in n-dimensional space while enjoying grant money, it lacks the depth of the cognitive functions and their roles within the function stack, and so I prefer a variation of C.F. Joseph's Jungian model, Jungian analytical psychology based on Barron's and Beeb's work, rather than the supposedly more accepted Big Five form, which seems to me identical to the form of MBTI on 16 personalities, which really is 32 personalities. Yet another power of 2, it goes from 16 to 32. And turbulent, limbic, calm, assertive, those, I think they have their place. It's just, there's probably other factors you could tack onto there too, make it 64, make it 128, although some will vary by development of functions and other factors in life. So, it's like taxonomy in general, though. There's, King Philip cried out for goodness sake. You have all those different subsets. Big Five might somehow be a better empirical system based on how they sample, but I believe the various socionics forms are a better axiomatic system and is far more useful for character creation than mere statistical analysis and so much inadvertent cherry-picking of a data based on sampling methods and unintentionally leading questions. Like most of them, they're trying to go for censor bias as far as I'm concerned. Like, well, you can look it up. Usually MBTI has intuitive bias, asking questions that produce intuitive response is basically, whereas the other one is kind of like down looking on intuition. So they really ought to do better on asking proper questions. I'm not saying I'm an expert at it, I just can recognize things that are wrong. It's like you can see a machine that's broken and realize, yes, this is broken. No, I can't fix it perfectly. I might be able to patch it up a little, but yeah, I'm fairly certain this is broken. Anyway, and everything else that messes with statistics in general, like How to Lie with Statistics, the politician's favorite book. Any politician. Doesn't matter which bandwagon you like, they're all liars. The MBTI only really gives you the shorthand letters, and Big Five is only the shorthand letters renamed in essence. But shorthand for what? The cognitive functions, of which there are 8. Each person has all 8 cognitive functions, and they are arranged in a stack according to how they are preferred. While the official MBTI may only consider the first 4 functions, the ego stack, I consider the 8 function models of socionics more accurate. The MBTI shorthand indicates the first 2 cognitive functions, the order of the rest being derivable by a couple of patterns. For those which haven't already heard of MBTI, though, I'd recommend taking the tests on 16 personalities and keys to cognition. Yes, they're bad. I know. They're still, within a mile or so versus an astronomical, well, not that accurate. Better than nothing. Even though they'll only give a ballpark idea of your type and introduce you to stereotypes, it is still fairly worthwhile. You get an idea where you are at least. Work from there. The keys to cognition site goes into cognitive functions a bit too, if you wish to read their definitions, although it's difficult to get to that. Now, it seems like you can't find the link even if you search, but search engines are turning themselves into garbage anyway. Anyhow, MBTI itself has, of course, the dichotomies on the test of introversion versus extroversion, intuition versus sensing, thinking versus feeling, and judging versus perceiving. However, everyone has both thinking and feeling functions, intuition and sensing functions, judgment and perception functions. It's not who has or doesn't have them, it's how the functions are arranged within a stack of preferences that matters. And you have function pairs, both judgment and perception functions. Anyone that has FI and ego, that's introverted feeling introverted. Has TE, thinking extroverted thinking. Just at a different placement within their ego functions, and introverted sensing goes with extrovert intuition, and extrovert sensing with introvert intuition. So you have 2 sets of function pairs within the ego stack, and 2 more, the other 2, in the id or shadow or overshadowed functions that are higher stress and less valued. So you have both intuition and sensing, you have both thinking and feeling in each stack, the valued and the unvalued. It's not who does... Yeah, I've read that. Such as which do you value more, authenticity or social harmony? And yeah, some FE types don't like the idea of authenticity not going with social harmony, but it's like when Jesus said what is it? It's like the word hate meaning love less. It doesn't mean don't love whatsoever. but it's a prioritization. So FE types will prioritize social harmony. They'll have authenticity in their undervalued functions, their overshadowed functions. They still have it. It's just, which one do you love more? Do you love authenticity or do you love social harmony? That kind of thing. You value both, but you value one more than the other generally. Under stress, what you value then may change a bit, and depth psychology makes rather useful predictions as to how. But even if it were inaccurate in the real world, it still may be extremely useful for creating fictional characters which behave differently and value things differently. It seems accurate to me, and I mean accurate in terms of close to true. Some don't use the word accurate right, and that sounds silly too, doesn't it? But TI types value precision, not accuracy. It's precision in speech versus accuracy. Accuracy is a value of truth. Precision is a value of exactitude. It's like measuring in chemistry or physics. How many numbers after the decimal point do you have? The more numbers you have, the more precise it is, but how accurate you are is how close to the truth you are, because you can have infinite precision but be completely wrong. And that may be what this seems like. I'm sure to anyone that's anchored to considering it pseudoscience will be like, oh, this is all wrong. Everything you say is wrong. Good for them. But yeah, I see this as probable truth, and at the very least, still useful for character creation. So it seems accurate to me, but even if it weren't, the reader must admit it still has utility. In this article, I hope to show you how depth psychology may be useful for writing fiction, as well as understanding people in real life. But first we need to learn a bit of the basics. What are cognitive functions? The thing everyone has 5,000 different definitions for. But here are mine. First, let's arrange them by two main types, judgment and perception. Now, there are some differences between how socionics and the other schools of thought defines them, how they define them. Sorry, I can't edit right now anyway. But here is my understanding and definitions based on them. Judgment functions. FI, introverted feeling is authenticity, caring most about one's own learned morals and feelings rather than that of the group's. This is the rebel, with or without a cause, and it stands alone if it has to. FE, extroverted feeling, is social harmony, caring more about the feelings of others and the group's ethics. Types with high FE tend to view types with high FI as selfish, while types with high FI tend to view types with high FE as fake. Yes, that is rude sounding. Congrats on noticing that. TI, introverted thinking, is logical consistency, values precision in language and logic most. It has the nuances of pedanticism. That is being, nitpicky about everything. Over definitions, needing to use the exactly right word, define terms precisely. To another extent, it also tends to value individual methods and being particular about how things are done, like seasoning food in a manner one is used to, or having to have an exact brand. And also it's like basic science as compared to applied science. Knowing something for its own sort, rather than learning enough to be useful kind of thing. T, extroverted thinking, this is the applied science thing, like engineering, is problem solving, affecting things in the outer world rather than caring as much about how things work exactly so long as it works. Types with TE as the first function tend to be commanding of others, while types with TE and the second tend to be parental rather than commanding. Perception functions. SI, introverted sensing. It is associated with duty, routine, and even patriotism, probably due to desiring connection to the past, and has the nuance of valuing one's own sensory experiences. Also values attention to details, while types with high TI may be pedantic over definitions and precise language. Types with high SI tend to be pedantic about rules and asserting details. They often consider those who can't remember details well to be liars because they value minutiae so highly. It's like, sometimes memories get notarized, and like with my stepdad, he'd always just scream his orders at me and demand I repeat them verbatim no matter how stupid they were. Like exactly his method of cleaning the dishes and all that sort of stuff. That was fun. And I have Asperger's syndrome, so all that forced eye contact and being right in my space screaming at me was a joy. But anyhow, here we go some more. SE, extrovert sensing, basically valuing living in the moment, and sensory binges also for types with low SE, still valued, like INTJs with SE fourth, anima, inferior, or aspirational, and ENFPs with SE eighth. Their extreme mode can be similar, but it's more valued for INTJs, but being at the end of those stacks still makes it a joy. Though it has the nuance of valuing the sensory experiences of others. The physical environment at the moment is what types with high SE would notice most rather than associations to the past as SI does. And ENFPs and ENTPs will still be going for SI first since they have SI in their valued functions. But NI, introvert intuition, is basically subconscious probabilistic insight, letting your mind mull things over essentially rather than consciously think about it bit by bit in a TI fashion as much. It's like doing arithmetic homework, one digit at a time kind of thing versus like measuring it out in your mind kind of thing, like roughly this much, kind of similar to that. But it's like seeing the picture of how things are or may be, and needing to find the words to describe it. NI has the nuance of willpower, like this is what I want to do, although sometimes it's more like this is what seems most probable. And even with valuing NI most, it doesn't mean you're gonna be like some rich, well-to-do jerk. That also slightly depends on what you want and what the conditions around you are. Everything's set up to entrap you and ensnare you into debt or contracts that are useless for you and beneficial to those they serve. And when everything is owned and there's no real place to go, the most you can do is see how things are, even if you can't do anything about it. Or it feels like that anyway. One landmine after another. It doesn't matter how many times you walk up hills both ways. NE, extrovert intuition, is essentially brainstorming and considering the possibilities. It also has the nuance of considering the intentions of others. The higher NE is within the stack, the more optimistic of others the person is, and lower, more pessimistic. This is a way to tell ENFPs apart from ESFPs actually, as ESFPs have NE last as their most pessimistic function, while ENFPs have it as their most optimistic function. While NI is a probability calculator, NE is the function of what if, ever considering what if this and what if that. It's an endless childlike curiosity desiring to ever know more. And in like probability and statistics, it's like what is it? Not phase space or probability space. Like you flip a coin, you have two outcomes, heads or tails. You flip roll a dice, you have 6 outcomes, or d6, or if you d24, 24 outcomes, and that's the probability space. I think it's the term. Either way, you have that many possibilities within that kind of group. So that's more what NE focuses on. What are the possibilities? NI is like, this is the most probable, but that also requires more of an asymmetric type of dice throwing, like the dice is weighted kind of thing. Or, if you throw a dart, an actual dart, it's going to land somewhere within where you tried to throw it to, but there are variances. Or like if you're shooting a rifle at a paper target, and if you don't have a spotter especially, you can still try shooting at the same point repeatedly, and that'll at least reduce the grouping size. But if there's no wind anyway, and if the manufacturer of the ranged device is not too hokey. But anyhow, there's more to each function, sometimes differing between schools of thought on minor details mostly, but this is a basic formulation meant to give an idea of them rather than explain every detail. For example, in Dave's superpowers model, he has a flow of information to patterns, going with SE gathering raw data, SI organizing data, NE generating patterns, NI organizing patterns, and this might actually be rather useful in explaining compatibility in types. Please research the matters in more detail if you so wish. And sorry to repeat myself, but I'm presenting what to me seems the most probable, rather than examining every school of thought in detail. There is plenty of detail to be found, so seek and ye shall find, but hopefully you'll still find this concise explanation of the systems of typology useful. Shorthand code. What does it mean to be an INTJ or ENFP? I'm sure most reading this already have a fair idea from stereotypes, most of which are probably based off of usage of the first two cognitive functions mainly. But how do these four-letter codes translate into the cognitive functions of each type? Let's go by each letter in order. The first letter tells whether the type has an introvert or extrovert cognitive function to start with. For INTJs, it's the perception function NI, introvert intuition, while for ENFPs, it's the perception function NE, extrovert intuition. Though there's some debate as to whether or not cognitive introversion or extroversion relates to social introversion or extroversion, I think it does to some extent, probably in decreasing social extroversion. Probably in decreasing social extroversion. FE first, extrovert feeling, because it's all about the feelings of others. SE, because it's about the sensory experience of others. TE, they tend to be commanding of others, so they'll go out of their way to be commanding of others. NE, they're about the intentions of others, but that can be more of an internal thing to do, is to just go through the possibilities within one's mind. Like, it might be this, might be that, rather than directly asking, per se. But, yeah. And I just had mirrored this, going NITI, SI, FI. Because symmetry is usually a good principle, but not always. I mean, there's more matter than antimatter, apparently, so it's not an absolute rule, but yeah, for the extroverted functions, this is what seems most probable to me, and for the introverted functions, I mean, it's a little iffy, but maybe like that. But such is my speculation, at least, and I feel uncertain about the introverted functions, though symmetry usually makes partial sense anyway. The second letter tells whether the strongest or least stressful to use perception function. The first letter for INTJ is NI, and it's a perception function. I need to reword this somewhere. The second letter tells whether the strongest or least stressful to use perception function is an intuitive or sensory function. For both INTJs and ENFPs, they have an intuitive function as theirs. For ISTJs, SI would be highest in the function stack. For ESFPs, SE. The third letter tells whether the highest judgment function in the stack is a thinking or feeling function. For INTJs, TE is higher than FI, and FE is the blind spot trickster point of least resistance function, while for ENFPs, FI is higher than TE, and TI is the blind spot trickster for them. Though they can certainly be brilliant. Intelligence is independent of TI. TI is just going to be about precision and organizing one's own mind versus the outer world kind of thing. The fourth letter is whether or not the first extroverted function is a judgment function. The types, whether it's judgment or not. There's the third letter. Fourth letter tells whether or not the first extroverted function is a judgment or perception function. For INTJs, the first extroverted function is TE, a judging function. For ENFPs, NE is the most visible outwardly. The perception function there. Okay, in another school of thought, socionics models, they have a lowercase last letter, and it indicates whether the first function is a judgment or perception function. So an ENFP is an ENF lowercase p, while an INTJ is an INT lowercase p within that convention, but here I'll be using the MBTI convention. It is the most common anyway, and less annoying than having to explain that all the time. Although, this is a pain too. But once you get over the hill, not over the hill, the learning curve, whatever. Socionics is more useful in this matter for looking from the inside, while MBTI is more useful for looking from the outside. So, putting it all together, how do we determine the stack functions of a type from the letters? Let's go with just one type, the NFP. The E indicates the first stack function is extroverted, so the lowercase letters arranged like that, alternating EI, and P tells us the first extroverted function is a perception function. So, what type of perception function? An N type. So you had to reference the fourth letter already, just to make that in order kind of thing. NE is first. The third letter tells us a feeling function is the strongest judgment function. So the next begins with F, namely FI, because that arranges the letter of extrovert, introvert. Well, that's 2 out of 4 here, and 8 total, but how do we determine the rest? Function pairs. These function pairs go together. NE and SI. Extrovert intuition goes with introvert sensing. NI and SE. Introvert intuition and extrovert sensing go together. TE and FI. Extrovert thinking and introvert feeling go together. TI and FE. Introvert thinking and extrovert feeling. And there's actually a few proverbs on that. I started making a series about proverbs and cognitive functions, but I got tired of one guy constantly spamming the comment sections with just random articles. The last one calling me a heretic or something, and that was a lovely thing. It's like, what the heck, dude? There's always someone saying that kind of crap. Anyhow, also there's a bit of symmetry. The middle functions will be either judgment or perception functions, and the outer functions the opposite. Here, let me show you. First, adding the judgment function pair TE. TEFI. It goes like that though. So it should probably say first adding from the judgment function pair T plus FI, we have TE. And adding it there to the NEFI TE. Now completing the symmetry with the perception function pair SI. NEFI TE SI. So what does all this mean? From left to right, these are the functions of least stressful to most stressful to use within the ego of the person or character. There are stress modes looping between the first and third function. Please look online, INTJ NiFi loop, for example. Yeah, and ISTJs, they're lucky. They get sci-fi, and sci-fi is cool. But under least stress, a person will be using their first functions more than their lower functions. What about the rest of the functions, though? They're the shadow, or id, or unconscious, or whatever you like to call it, and to determine them, it's a rather simple pattern. Invert the introversion and extroversion of the first four functions. So, the EI becomes IE for the shadow, like a mirror kind of thing. Well, not fully like that, but the letters stay the same pattern, just the introverted and extroverted ones. And I know everyone's probably thinking EIEIO and just fee-fi fo-fum and all that kind of nonsense that helps to not pay attention. Although I'm sure I'm being boring too, so sorry about that. Try not to be annoying. Can you guess what the shadow, id, and conscious type for the INFP is? NI is first, FE is second. It's the INFJ. For an ego function stack, that's INFJ. It's the INFP shadow. My own convention for listing the entire stack is to use the double arrows, the less, to separate the ego and id functions, like so. It doesn't mean greater than or equal to. Here it's just a separator in lieu of a better symbol. Feel free to figure out a better one. I'm sure there is. Hopefully my explanation of how to decode the cognitive functions from the shorthand is useful in learning, although admittedly recognizing the usage of cognitive functions in others and encoding is more valuable, as well as far more difficult. Shorthand codes and stack functions. For those which would rather memorize the codes and stack functions they represent outright, here you go. Feel free to write them down. Write them out daily for a month or however best works for you. So if you want to do that rote, or heck, I'll read them out. It'll just take forever to upload. ENFP, NE, FI, TE, SI. That's their ego function stack. Shadow now. NI, FE, TI, SE. INTJ, NI, TE, FI, SE. That's the ego. Now the shadow. NE, TI, FE, SI. ENFJ. Notice it's different from ENFP by quite a bit. Completely different ego functions. See this? That's what the J changes it. But anyhow. Ego stack. FE, NI, SE, TI. And shadow. FI, NE, SI, TE. INTP. Ego. TI, NE, SI, FE. Shadow. TE, NI, SE, FI. ENTP. NE, TI, FE, SI. Shadow. NI, TE, FI, SE. INFJ. Ego. NI, FE, TI, SE. Shadow. NE, FI, TE, SI. ENTJ. Ego. TE, NI, SE, FI. Shadow. TI, NE, SI, FE. INFP. FI, NE, SI, TE. Shadow. FE, NI, SE, TI. ESFP. SE, the ego. SE, FI, TE, NI. Shadow. SI, FE, TI, NE. ISTJ, SITEFINE, shadow, SETIFENI, ESFJ, FESINETI, shadow, FISENITE, ISTP, ego, TISENIFE, shadow, TESINEFI, ESTP, excuse me, ego, SETIFENI, shadow, SITEFINE, ISFJ, SIFETINE, shadow, SEFITENI, ESTJ, TESINEFI, shadow, TISENIFE, ISFP, FISENITE, shadow, FESINETI. Sloan code. Welcome to the Big Five kind of thing. Sloan is essentially just like MBTI 32, 16 personalities thing. That's why I'm calling it MBTI 32, because it has 32 different personalities because of the turbulent and assertive, which is common limbic. Like, Sloan is essentially just MBTI 32, like what you get from the 16 personalities website with the additional field of turbulent versus assertive, which is probably the same as Big Five's field of limbic versus calm. INTJ in Sloan code is RLOEI. Reserved, limbic, open. What is it? I forget. It's just a different name for the same kind of things. ENFP-T is SLUIA, no, AI. And ENFP-A is SCUAI. Here's this. You can pause and read it. But, yeah, and there's always disagreements like, oh, it's not exactly the same. It's like, it seems like it enough to me. Socionics codes. Socionics has a bit different approach to coding the types. One form, highly similar to MBTI's approach, is to have a lowercase letter at the end instead of indicating the type of the first extroverted function, which is easiest to see from the outside. It indicates the type of first function, whether it's a judgment or perception function. So for ENFPs having NEFI, etc., their first function is a perception function, and so they're still ENFP. However, for INTJs having NITE, their first function is also a perception function, and thus they're actually INT lowercase p. And likewise, INTPs having TI first, a judgment function, are INT lowercase j. In a list format, here you have it. Extroverts have their same last letter, just lowercase. Introverts have a different last letter, lowercase. Another socionics code has only 3 letters. The first 2 representing the kind of functions, and the last letter whether the first function is an introvert or extrovert function. Intuitive means, of course, a function will be an N function. Here they use I. Sensing is S, also S here. Logical is T and is L here. Ethical is F and here E. Introvert and extrovert are I and E at the end. So for an ENFP having NEFI, their first function is intuitive, and so I for that. Their second function is feeling or ethical, so E, and their first function is extrovert, So E. So an MBTI ENFP is here, an intuitive ethical extrovert. In list format, ENFP equals IEE. ENFJ is EIE. Let me see, that would be ethical intuitive extrovert. INTJ is going to be ILI, intuitive logical introvert, while an INTP is an LII, logical intuitive introvert. ENTP, ILE, intuitive logical extrovert. ENTJ, logical intuitive extrovert. INFJ, IEI, intuitive ethical introvert. INFP, ethical intuitive introvert. ESFP, sensing ethical extrovert. ESFJ, ethical sensing extrovert. ISTJ, SLI, and I've heard people argue that it's not the same thing, there is no perfect match. I really don't see that, and I don't care to hear those arguments, because they're just from an, oh, I don't agree perfectly with the definitions that are arbitrarily so far apart. It's like, yeah, and do you think the King James is the only Bible too because of copyrights or something? Come on. Here we go. ISTJ is a sensing logical introvert. ISTP is a logical sensing introvert. You know, TI first, then SE, logical sensing introvert, and that's SI, sensing first, then TE, thinking logical. It's a shorthand. It's, you know, the functions above, they have both an ego. ESTP, SLE, sensing logical extrovert. ESTJ, LSE, logical sensing extrovert. ISFJ, SEI, sensing ethical introvert. ISFP, ethical sensing introvert. And yet another code used in Socionics Model G, because they have both the hero and critic function in their social mission block. And there's so many blocks. And the parent function right below the hero in the self-affirmation block. Both the parent and the critical parent are adjacent to the hero. And so they sort of count both in the second and sixth function in the normative stack. Just, look up Socionics Model G. They have lots of charts. They do look cool, and they have some good explanations for their model. I don't know if I fully agree with it, but they did a lot of work, and it might be worth seeing what they've done. It sort of makes sense, like with how easy it can be to see FE usage in ENFPs, so they can seem like ENFJs even, although FI is still valued more and is less stressful to use. It basically lists the first function followed by a combination of the parent and critic functions like so. ENFP, NEFX, showing both FE and FI and FE are highly used by ENFPs versus ENFP. Here's a list of them. ENFP is NEFX, ENFJ, FE, and X. They could probably remove the X from all those. Right? Is there any purpose to it? Yeah, S, the first function, and whether it's a T or an F. Next, or, well, no. Or for the ones that have a perception function in the middle, it would be the perception function's first letter. So that's how that goes. I forgot about it, but yeah, you can pause and copy it all down if you want. pieces of the same big puzzle. As far as I can see, the big 5 Sloan is just MBTI with an extra field added, but otherwise it's the same basic thing dressed up in the Emperor's new clothes with different letters. The additional field, in my estimation, relates to tendency to go into stress modes, looping, fourth function grip, the shadow functions, etc. Turbulent or limbic types would go into stress modes more, assertive or calm types less. Probably tells how much of a life of luxury they've lived if they're an assertive or calm type, or how stressed out they tend to be if they're turbulent slash limbic. Well, you plop someone, Prince versus Pauper situation into a crappy situation, they'll quickly learn how to deal with stress, or they won't. Anyway, another code used in socionics has INTJs, or ILI, intuitive logical introverts, while for INTPs, they're LII, logical intuitive introverts. Basically, it tells what the starting letter of the first two functions are, along with whether they start introvert or extrovert. Logical means thinking, ethical means feeling, sensing is sensing, intuitive is intuitive. ENFPs having the starting functions of any NFI begin with an intuitive function, NE, followed by an ethical function, FI, and their first function is extrovert, although ENFPs are usually ambiverted socially. So their code in this convention would be intuitive ethical introvert, IEE, and for ESFP having SEFI, there's the sensing ethical extrovert, or SEE, etc. It's fairly straightforward, albeit not as well known. There's also Enneagram, and for the record, I will say this multiple times, I do not care about the etymological fallacy. The whole thing of like, Christmas is a pagan holiday, or Easter is from Estar, and all that sort of stuff. What the heck? Yeah, it's what's in the heart that matters, and who is really going to be going into all the depth of where Enneagrams started and actually care about it, if it was so pagan and whatnot. To me, it's a proto-socionic system, and each of the numbers approximately relates to cognitive functions, although two of them relate to like two different types rather than that, and the rest are basically cognitive functions. Anyway, there's also Enneagram, which has 9 functions of a sort basically, some of which are probably singular cognitive functions, and at least a couple likely represent individual types more or less. I don't know enough about that system to say for sure, but this is how I perceive it to be for now. Perhaps in a later edition of this book I will see about. I was planning to make this a book, but I only wrote like 40 pages into it. So here I'm making a video of it, so you don't have to read it. You can hear my commentary too. Whoop-de-doo, right? I will see about going into more detail on this. No, I really won't. I've probably gone into way too much anyway. But for now, I know too little on Enneagram to really address it. It does seem useful as a cross-checking tool to see if someone is the MBTI type they say they are. As a result, way far out from norm might indicate they weren't honest on the first test. Or one of the things on tests like that is they'll be going with how they've been behaving recently rather than how they generally are. And if they're going by particulars, it's more likely they're a sensing type, because it's like the details rather than being able to make a general trend of how they are as a person, or how they would do things in hypotheticals in general. But I don't know. And it's stress versus behavior, nature versus nurture. What's least stressful for you is your nature. What you've learned to do is behavior, basically. Some circumstances require different behaviors than others, and the more you're in those circumstances, the more you'll develop functions you may or may not like. So you can have your shadow functions more developed than your ego functions, even though it's like, if you wanted to do life a different way, you'd probably go with what's in your ego functions. But you can't always have a life so pleasant as to just focus on things you like. For sometimes you can, but for most you can't, and that really sucks. Anyhow, it's all arbitrary in my opinion, which convention is used, and whatever works, works. But for this book I'm sticking with MBTI shorthand, as it's more well known. You can make an esoteric form yourself too. It's certainly not impossible. Just figure out the rules, and you can write it in Klingon for all it matters. But have fun. Weighting of the stack functions. If everyone has all 8 functions, how is anyone different? Indeed, this is probably why there are schools of thought which have only the first 4 cognitive functions within a stack considered, because it is easier to work with to say we have only these 4, rather than we have only these 4 in ego, but the rest are in the shadow. You value the first 4, you undervalue the last 4. That's how I see it. But I think the 8 function models are more accurate. It's easier to comprehend the simpler models, but it lacks detail. Of course, detail alone is just precision and not accuracy, and you can easily have super complicated systems which are inaccurate within any field. Still, frankly, it seems likely to me that we use all 8 functions, and the ones in the shadow /unconscious /id are used more pessimistically. The further down the stack functions one goes, the more pessimistic the usage generally. Although technically the least used function is the second to last, which is often called the blind spot, or more accurately the point of least resistance, or polar function in socionics. The attitudes of the stack functions. 1. Hero, the function of least stress, which tries to be heroic, fighting the bad guys like John McClane in the Die Hard series. Underdeveloped, the hero is a bumbler, destroying more than helping. So more like Mel Gibson's character in the Lethal Weapon series. 2nd. Parent, the supportive function when developed that keeps the child from running amok, but when underdeveloped is a lazy derelict of a parent just letting the child do whatever. 3. Child, the playfully optimistic function which wants to prove itself and show off what it can do. Underdeveloped, the child is a spoiled brat who runs amok and making IXTJs look like FI dominant types. 4. Anima, inferior, aspirational, the source of fears and aspirations, as well as the generally most pessimistic valued function that tends to be used badly. Take my writing for example. Such is an example of SE inferior, as I do care about making the experience of reading enjoyable, though unfortunately I'm terrible at it. If going with anima, meaning soul, you could play with the metaphors, but that probably serves no purpose other than alienating sensor types which already dislike abstraction. I mean, it's going to really appeal to ISTJs, this is sarcasm, to call the underdeveloped anima ghost or poltergeist or whatever along those lines. FYI, I don't believe in ghosts myself. This is just a metaphor. I doubt souls wander and such after death. Such activity IRL, if not faked, would probably be demonic. Unfortunately, this is where the metaphorical abstraction starts becoming distasteful, and is of course arbitrary, so use whatever term suits you. As long as it conveys a sense of how it's used, how the cognitive function behaves at a certain placement, it doesn't matter otherwise, IMO, in my opinion. But I know sometimes the arbitrary can detract from desiring to learn further, so use whatever name you prefer or make up your own to use. 5. nemesis, although in some in socionics consider it more like a tool function. It also is a source of worries. Now, what's the difference between fear and worry? Here, and I misspelled here, what the heck. Whether it's consciously valued, being the first of the shadow, id, and conscious functions, is a highly unvalued function, such as for INTJs having any nemesis, brainstorming worries, like mild paranoia, though it's not really valued, and it's just useful for seeing the many ways everything can go wrong, essentially. When the nemesis is developed, it's more like a mercenary, but still a source of worries. Will they turn on me if the price is right, but more helpful? You know, like Jane Cobb versus Nathan Fillion, or what's his name in Firefly? Malcolm Reynolds. Anyhow, the critical parent in particular, which some call the Synex, is highly pessimistic both to the individual and the group. Underdeveloped, it is especially like the grumpy old man yelling at the cloud, shouting at kids to get off my lawn. But developed, it's like a wise old sage imparting wisdom, patronizing but well-meaning. Instead of being a grouchy old man, hypocritically condemning the younger generations for doing the same things he does or did, or still does, and did. When developed, the sage kindly looks down upon others to tell them how to improve. Polar, specifically meaning point of least resistance, is the least used of the unvalued functions. It's the blind spot or trickster. Beebe had it mirror the child function in the way of being like a comically spoiled brat in essence. You know, a problem child, that kind of thing. Blind spot mostly makes sense of how it appears to the outside, like for INTJs and ISTJs having FE polar, their blind spot is the emotional and social environment, and it makes us awkward turtles that can often be misread as angry grumpy butts. The polar function is the least used unvalued function. And so IXTJs are often considered to lack empathy. Yay! But via FI child, if someone we care about is having problems, we can learn and understand their problems either academically or through similar experience, and still give sympathy. When developed, it's more like a clown than a trickster, friendlier at least, being comical in a delightful way rather than, in a sense, more like Q from Star Trek. While normally undeveloped, this function... I lost it. I need to make this less of a wall of text. Where? While normally undeveloped, this function is the blind spot and source of comic awkwardness, like for INTJs being socially awkward. When it turns more into a clown than the trickster, it is likely more well behaved. Such as FE blind spot being, I don't care how you feel, these are the TE facts. When developed more, though not quite as good as FE aspirational for INTPs, it can still be more like, I don't mean to trample on your feelings, sorry if I do, but here are the TE facts, though I hope you won't be upset about it, as you probably will. Always. I'm offended, I get free cake. Wow. It's the most difficult to develop in my opinion. 8. Extreme. Sometimes called the demon, unfortunately for sensor types, as it's a detracting term, I know. Hence why I'm calling it the extreme function, because it avoids that association and still describes how the 8th function is used in pessimistic extremes. Sometimes the 4th function is called the anima, Latin for soul, so probably when named the term demon was picked likely to just mean bad soul, rather than referring to the occult or whatever else. Either way, I think extreme works better for avoiding that unnecessary association. For INTJs and INFJs, we have SE grip stress with their fourth function, but for ENFPs and ENTPs, they have SE eighth, which is even more difficult to deal with when stuck within. Though it can appear similar outwardly, as both types will focus on sensory binges when stuck in SE, but INTJs and INFJs will have SE as a valued function, while ENFPs and ENTPs have SE as an unvalued function. Easier to see from the inside, and they'll be more likely to revert to SI, which will be more like routine in matters. Where did it go? Similarly, for INTJs being forced to be patriotic or care about duty for its own sake, to get stuck in SI, it is not a pretty sight, as it is extremely frustrating to try and care about such arbitrary things. It's like, yeah, I was born here. Oh great, I have to sign another unilateral contract they can change at any moment. Do you agree to all these rules in advance we can change without letting you know? Like, what? How about no? Oh, you get to starve to death. How about no? ENFPs, however, have SI as their aspirational function, and so they are aspirationally more like an ISTJ with regard to SI, and it isn't as terrible for them when SI is developed. For any type having to be stuck in their extreme function too long, it is the most exhausting. Even though the blind spot is least used, it's used more like meh when people insist on you using it. Such as when people tell me to smile for them using FE blind spot, and I am just like, go kiss your own butt if it needs kissing so bad. But the extreme can be more easily developed than the blind spot too. Yeah, and working at Salvation Army for like outside the yuppie stores, customers telling me to smile for them in negative 20-degree weather. Heck no. It's like, oh yes, here's your, you want to see teeth? Yes, here I look like a dog bearing my teeth. Whoop-de-doo. Does that make you feel better? I hate that crap. Whatever though. But the extreme can be more easily developed than the blind spot too, as people tend to toggle between their hero and their extreme function, though it's easy enough to tell which is more stressful to use both inwardly and outwardly, as people don't care to use their extreme function, and their preference leans toward using their hero function even if they've been taught not to by others, like using an I when in a crowd of SJ temperament types which have SI valued, which tend to be blindly dismissive of NI. The ESTJ and ESFJ, especially since they have NI as their blind spot polar function. When developed, the demon function can become angelic, metaphorically. You can watch C.S. Joseph's videos about that. He really leans into the metaphor, which is a bit annoying, but it's thematic, it's metaphor, it's not meaning actual demons. Like, how many times do I need to say this and someone's still going to be like, I have Asperger's, and yet I hate that crap. I have a formal diagnosis of Asperger's, which doesn't count anymore because they can just change their stupid classification systems anytime they feel like and call it whatever else and all that stuff. But no, I have Asperger's syndrome, and you know, when people go on about nitpicking names or saying Pokemon are demons because Mon means monsters and monsters are demons and all that sort of stuff, it just ticks me off because it's a lie. It's an obvious lie too. It's like building a pharisaical fence a mile high and not expecting the wind to knock it over. Anyhow, onward to more stuff, which is to say it can be made useful rather than just pessimistically overused or underused. In socionics model-G, it's called the role function, and though I think that conveys it being more useful than it is, at least it might sound better to sensor types. It's the most stressful to use, and getting stuck in it is like the the fourth function grip stress, but even worse because the fourth function is valued while the eighth function is unvalued. I'm not sure about that anymore now. I think I might have contradicted myself above there. Yeah, either way, it is a pain. But, yeah. Yeah, such as for people telling INTJs to do their duty. Yeah, I hate that. When the arbitrary rules are immoral. It's a source of hatred, disdain, and otherwise a pessimistic extreme. Only so many ways to say the same thing. While ENTJs have SI blind spot, SI polar, and don't feel obligated whatsoever, but will do whatever it takes via their NI parent, regardless of SJ types shilling on about how glorious duty is. Like Master and Commander at the Far Side of the World, where Jack Aubrey, I think in ESFJ, tells I don't remember what the name of the character that's like Daniel Jackson is, but it's like, oh yes, duty, I've heard it so highly spoken of, something like that. But, yeah. Where was I? An INTJ will be a bit more miffed about people trying to manipulate them that way. These are the rules we forced you to sign to. It's like, okay, could you get me a lighter so I can light it? How about put them in a shredder right along with all the suggestions in the suggestion box that you guys don't pay attention to? Also, mostly nostalgia is lost on INTJs. It is a pain, that's for sure, at least when life is infernal. Just thinking about the past is mostly a nope situation. I mean, I love my birds. They've been my family more than my family has. But for the most part, the past is past and it just sucks. Thinking about having to go back to a sweatshop again is also another joy. Anyhow, and tends to be more like PTSD than comforting. Pessimism and optimism of stack function places. C.S. Joseph did a better drawing board there. This I had two minus functions and it changed it to an M dash. But yeah, it alternates. Second one's first, let's see here. Here is the most optimistic, parents the first pessimistic, child the second optimistic, aspirational the most pessimistic, valued function, nemesis a slightly optimistic, unvalued function, critic fairly negative, shadow function, and the blind spot is slightly optimistic. It's the least optimistic, but it's still there a little bit. And extreme is way pessimistic. Functions 5 through 8 are still unvalued and have a shade of pessimistic nature even to the more optimistic ones, especially nemesis, since it is the source of worries. In C.S. Joseph's model with the four sides of the mind, focusing on the fourth, fifth, and eighth functions leads to the subconscious. Yeah. Subconscious, unconscious, and the superego, which are pessimistic. The subconscious, it's like, okay, in his model you have right here, they flip upside down, and I'm not showing it right, but yeah, pessimistic, say INTJs at focusing on fourth grip stress, whatever, it's going to be a pessimistic ESFP. Focusing on the nemesis function and INTJ would be like an ENTP, but with FE polar, and yeah, focusing on the extreme function like very pessimistic ISFJ. But yeah, it reverses for the ones that are at the bottom of the stacks, that sort of thing. It's an interesting model. I think it has some truth to it. Rearrangements of the shadow functions. One thing I've noticed is that it's actually possible to be uncertain whether a person is a P or a J type, even though it means the cognitive functions in the ego are completely opposite. It somewhat makes sense, though, with the socionics homology having the critic function and the social mission block right along with the hero. Please see Ben Vassleron's, oh yeah, that's the socionics homology guys stuff, on videos on YouTube for more details about the Model G if you like. But I'm just using this nugget to help later on with type interactions and compatibility. Consider it that INTJs and INTPs can be mistaken for each other, and ENFPs for ENFJs. In the Model G, INTJs have TI as their creative function, and it uses optimum energy, though I don't agree with the notion of energy. It's like minimal cortisol instead. So, like what's least stressful? And that's not TI for least stress, it's NI. But you can see their model and see how they explain things. I'm probably doing it badly here right now. It's been too long since I watched any of their stuff. As it's like saying cold flows, but yeah, like the model of heat, kinetic energy. It's heat that flows and not cold. Cold is just absence of heat kind of thing, or a lower temperature zone kind of thing. Less kinetic energy in an area of moving molecules, for which has nothing to do with MBTI and socionics. It's going to be cortisol for stress mostly. I'm sure there's probably other things in biochemistry that relate to other things and what parts of the mind are used. That's probably going to be able to be mapped out if it hasn't yet. Anyway. But regardless, it's a highly used function, though both critical and self-critical. Critical of others and self-critical. But more critical of oneself for introverted functions, I would think. Because it's introvert just means looking inward, versus extrovert means looking outward kind of thing. Likewise, ENFPs can seem very much like an FE dominant type, yet they value FI more. Still, their FE tends to be excellent and can easily appear like an ENFJ, thereby, but yeah, they're going to be treated like that long term, probably not going to go well. So, if you can see where I'm going, I think the shadow functions ought to have the critic function treated as the highest within the unvalued functions. This also fits with the polar function being the least used unvalued function. Instead of the usual order, I think it might make more sense if the shadow were basically the type equivalent to their first four-letter code with the last letter flipped, like INTJ having, let's see, that is INTJ there and that's INTP there, rather than ENTP. Yeah. I don't know if I agree with this anymore, but it was a hypothesis I had a while back. However, the attitudes would likely remain the same, such as for ENFPs, the critic would still be FE, the nemesis would still be an I. So that sort of messes up the, not symmetry per se, but the way that they had it, N to N versus now it's N to T, that sort of thing. The order, though no longer showing the mirror image dichotomies between hero and nemesis, parent and critical parent, child and trickster, anima and that word, it instead coincides better in terms of stress for usage and thus fits better with the tests as their J and P dichotomies rather than IXXJ versus EXXP. It would just be okay. I don't know why I wrote that like that. I'm getting a little tired here too. So it would be like this, using greater than, I don't know that symbol's name, but a tall line, and then another greater than, to divide this version so as to keep it separate from the normative stack functions, stack function orders as they're usually done. So there's all that, and I don't think I agree with this anymore. I think it was just an interesting idea that I had for a moment, and I'm not sure about it anymore. And for further revision, just suggest usage in the ego stack, since the first third loop would tend to develop the child function most and the inferior next to it. Here's that. I'm sure I've lost everyone else. I've lost myself too. I am also tired, and it's like really late. But however, this would pertain more to usage on or average development from stress, but the normative stack functions would still show increasing stress from left to right. Each person still has their own development, and functions may be developed based on required usage, though in my opinion the more stressed out a person is throughout their life, the more their lower functions will be developed than their naturally preferred functions. So, am I actually done? Yeah, I did. So, finish this. Good. I think I might do another video soon about nature versus nurture, and another format possible to use for character creation particularly, and maybe have like a scale of high, medium, low, 1, 2, 3, whatever for function development under the nurture slash behavior field. You know, like how INTJ 5 wing 4 and all that sort of stuff goes. Instead of using Enneagram, since now it's being treated like Christmas and Easter, you could have a different type of thing where it's like going to keys to cognition, and you get just you know, if you arrange the functions by percentages, it doesn't go into a function stack, not even like this, not like this, but just an arbitrary arrangement. If you answer those questions based on behavior, like imagine how your character might behave and such of that sort, you could just list out highest percentages to lowest, and figure like whether they're highly developed or lowly developed, and you know, high, medium, low, or whatever number scale you arbitrarily to pick for that. And you have, you know, nature would just be like the first 4 letters pertaining to their stress, but the other thing would be behavior. Or I'm saying it right now. You get the idea, right? You could do that on your own. Or I might make a Excel spreadsheet, or, well, open calc spreadsheet, but anyhow. I'm done with this. So take care, everyone, and try not to go crazy.